With a bang, energy and change came to every part of our universe. Seismic or small, it continues.
Change is all around us, shaped by technology and human ingenuity. We can make it work for you and your business.
Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to this live session. It's a panel session. We're going to be talking about how technology and innovation are assisting in the health and safety of employees across the mining and resources sector. My name's Alan Broome. I am the Chairman Emeritus of Austmine. Austmine is the Australian Met Sector Industry Association, which develops opportunities for the Australian Met sector across Australia and the globe. We have 640 odd members, and it is the largest Met sector member organisation in the world. So it's a very, I think, a very meritorious organisation. Fortunately, we have quite a number of our members who are very well versed on specific topics, and we're very lucky today to have a panel which comprises 3 speakers, and we'll get straight into it. And those speakers are going to talk about how technology and innovation assists the health and safety of employees across the mining sector. Firstly, we have Brett Craig, who is the Executive Director at Compass Group Australia. Compass Group provides food and a range of support services to customers in the workplace, schools, colleges, hospitals, leisure, remote environments such as mine sites and so forth. Secondly, we have Gaston Carrion, who's the Managing Director of Accenture Strategy and Consulting based in Melbourne, specialising in talent and organisational human potential. Gaston leads that particular part of the practice in the Asia Pacific and has a very strong focus on natural resources globally. Thirdly, Mark O'Brien, who is General Manager Digital Technology and Innovation at CITIC Pacific. Mark's responsibilities cover strategic engagement with business, leadership and technology solutions delivery, and ownership of the key application and infrastructure platforms at CITIC Pacific across mining in both IT and OT. So I think 3 panelists who have definitely got a lot to say on the subject that we will explore today. We've got 30 minutes and we're going to get straight into it. So let me kick off by firstly asking Gaston. Gaston, how's COVID impacted the ways of working operations in offices, and what does it mean for the future of workplace health and safety, particularly in the mining industry?
Thank you, Alan. I guess I would say that I would like to answer the question in 2 parts. During the pandemic and post the pandemic, I think obviously some of the countries and cities where we have operations that are getting out a little bit of this crisis. And during the crisis, obviously there were the typical restrictions around people working from home. If possible, in the operations, we try to reduce exposure. Obviously, some of the key measures were to reduce the fly-in, fly-outs and extending some of the rosters. Now, I think the important part is I can see that the miners are doing post-pandemic. And interestingly, some of the discussions that I have with some of the CHROs is there is a redefinition of the spaces. And if you think about an operations in the mining sector, we have obviously the operation itself, where probably most of the activity happen. We do have the near shore or near operations, which are spokes areas and where some activity around planning and execution on behalf of the operations could be done. And then obviously we have the headquarters or the offices itself, where now the question is, how are we going to redefine the utilization of that? And finally, we have the homes. And, obviously a lot of the workforces are now, using home as a place where work happens. Now, I think the discussions that I have is there is an intent to look at the workforce and segment the workforce and define what work that particular role needs to do in each of these spaces. So in that way, also, we can reduce the exposure to this element around the social distancing and the movements of people into the various locations, but also reduce quite significantly the risks associated to be in some of these operational sites. So I guess probably one of the elements, if we take one example, for example, in the support functions in HR, you could say, well, you know, the HR practitioners were coming quite a lot to site to support with certain activities, but at the same time, they were doing some administrative work. That could create some risk and exposure to risk for that particular role. Now, the question is now with COVID-19 and the changes that we have done, now when that person goes to site, it strictly is going to engage with the supervisors and the leaders for that particular day or a couple of days that needs to be there. And then all the other work, it could be done either in the office or at home. So if you are doing emails, if you are writing reports, you don't need to be in the operations to do that. So I guess, Alan, just to summarize, what I see is a complete redefinition of spaces in the industry and being more mindful around what critical roles really needs to be in the operation to reduce significantly the exposure to risk. And I see, you know, quite a few miners already having very good benefits as a result of that change of strategy.
Thanks, Gaston. Mark or Brett, have you got any thoughts from your experience?
I think possibly the only thing I would add to that, Alan, is we need to think about the direct health and safety obligations from an employer's perspective. We also need to think about the employee expectations. And I think there's a lot that's happened through the COVID space around what people expect to see in terms of overt cleaning and hygiene standards, testing and verification of hygiene standards, and things like that, which wasn't commonplace in a pre-COVID world. So that's something I think a lot of the surveys that we've done with employees over the last few months have highlighted a few areas like that, which are taken a much higher priority now in their workplace wellbeing piece that goes well and truly beyond just the physical safety of the environment, but the physical safety of their work.
Okay. And Mark, any observations you'd make?
No, just in broad agreement, really.
Okay. Well, let me stay with you, Mark. You know, and just ask you a sort of a second question. Traditionally, mining companies have been slow to adopt new technologies, but COVID has forced us to all move a lot quicker, perhaps, than we would have normally. Have mining companies sped up their adoption of results and new technologies as a consequence of COVID?
Yeah, look, it's I've got a couple of thoughts on this. First of all, definitely COVID has accelerated some things, but I think some people might be overplaying a little bit the impact of what COVID might have achieved in the longer run. But definitely, if we look at the modern workplace, aspects of how we collaborate, how we work, some of the technologies that have sort of come into play, that there's definitely been a refinement and a deeper, I guess, a deeper dive into using some of that stuff. But I would argue that mining companies traditionally being, you know, particularly in the Australian context, being somewhat remote, often having remote operations, that we've always had a high level of really utilizing some of these technologies anyway. So it's really just been actually just dipping a bit deeper into what's available and making better use of it, I think, in a range of different contexts has been useful. I'll come back to talking a bit about health and safety stuff, because I think, you know, that is one area where we've probably seen an acceleration, particularly around some of the protocols and wanting to you know, enforce certain compliances around the COVID stuff in particular, that we've seen a big uptake in mobility, the use of apps and, you know, some of these types of tools, which I think have been pretty useful. And certainly a number of companies have either developed their own apps or found ways of using various vendor offerings to assist with that whole process of keeping the workforce safe. But, you know, one thing to that broader question of whether, you know, mining, how slow mining is to take up technology, a point I did make in another forum was, I think sometimes we're a bit down on ourselves in mining, because there was a Canadian study done a couple of years ago that I had the opportunity to take a quick look at, and and they surveyed a number of industries, particularly around the use of AI and some of the new technologies coming through, and actually found mining to be on the leading edge of take up, and really getting into some of that stuff in a big way. And I think when we take a look at autonomy and automation, when we take a look at the amount of data that a lot of our equipment's putting out, and the way that that's now starting to be used with a lot of advanced analytics, the application of AI in a number of creative ways in the mining space, and IoT and remote operations, all of these sorts of things. I think we actually aren't doing too badly, and I think mining in general has been on a pretty good trajectory in terms of starting to value technology more and use it more. So I certainly feel like could we be doing better? Yes, but actually by and large, I don't think we're doing too badly. And I'm quite encouraged actually by what I see around the industry. I'm the global chair for the Global Mining Guidelines group on AI in mining. And over a 2-year period, it's been just amazing to see the take up and people getting stuck into AI and machine learning in a whole range of very interesting ways very quickly. So by and large, I'm actually quite encouraged. In terms of health and safety specifically, I think COVID has, just by dint of the nature of COVID, I think it has definitely raised a lot more interest in how we can use technology in health and safety environment within the business. And I think that's been driven by the need and requirement to sort of respond quickly and find ways of being consistent in the way we're handling a number of the challenges, so that we can keep operational and protect our people. So I think that's been actually, one area where there definitely has been some slightly faster uptake. But broadly, I'm not sure that COVID, if we talk about innovation across mining in general, I'm not sure that that's necessarily been a big impact or would remain that way for the long term.
No, I think your points are well made. In fact, I'm aware of 2 Austmine member companies who have been working together during the COVID period to look at the combining of artificial intelligence and real-time analytics with hands-on operational experience, I must say, to do some predictive analytics on safety and risk. So it might sound as though it's out there, but it actually looks at all of the incidents that the company has had, and it says the data would suggest that you're about to have a problem in this particular area, or there's a high risk safety incident potential in this particular area, and to be in a place where we're proactively looking at the use at what might happen and using technology to get there, I think is a real great breakthrough. And it wouldn't have happened if we hadn't have had the incident of COVID. Brett, do you have any comments around the same area?
Actually, I 100% agree. If you kind of look forward in terms of where the industry could and should be going in terms of the future of safety and the adoption of technology, I think it definitely comes in that predictive prevention, I think is probably the easy way to put it. I think we do it a lot in terms of asset management already, in terms of tracking information around when assets are going to fail. We should be doing the same work across all the myriad of data points we track operationally, lead and lag indicators from a safety perspective and everything else, to start predicting when failures might occur so we can intervene before it happens. And I agree that I really think that is the future of safety across the industry.
So, Gaston, I might come back to you with a third question. How are you seeing companies approach the transformation to more autonomous equipment and fewer equipment operators with its employees? I think these things are all linked. The fact of the matter is that what Mark and Brett have just been talking about in terms of taking up technology to effectively get more out of less is part of this autonomous drive. What's your impression of this?
Yeah, look, I think I want to pick up the comment from Mark around the acceleration or not. Obviously, there is a prioritization and focus on a speed to value and safety. But when we look at the approach for implementing either autonomous operations or some of the analytics and so forth, I think obviously there are 3 main requirements, right? Number 1 is having the correct IT infrastructure that helps you to have the right communications in order to provide that level of service. Second is, I think data, and Brett, you mentioned a few equipment that potentially can provide some level of predictive analytics and so forth. And obviously we need to have the right level of data. But third element, which I think it is critical, is the change management of the people. And I think, I've been part of some transformation programs in some of the miners. And I think one of the biggest risks that we have is the workforce transition. So that notion of, the reskilling or upskilling of the workforce to move from a truck driver to a maintainer of an autonomous vehicle. So how do we start thinking about doing that at scale and at speed? And I think, we are starting to see some good examples locally in Australia around certain academies to start preparing the workforce for the future of mining. And I think, we don't need to forget about that. The reality is that this change will happen if people is onboarded into the transformation. So I would say, very good that we have roadmap of implementing technology, but at the same time that we are building those roadmap of technology, we need to have a roadmap of workforce transition. Have clarity around what roles will be created in the future, because yes, there will be new roles created in the future. What roles are going to be retired? And how do we make that transition? At what point is time? What kind of workforce do we need? And so forth. And then interestingly as well, I think the other element is the impact on the communities that where we operate with, our social value agenda. Is not only the workforce that it is transforming, but it is the people in the communities that we also need to reskill to support the services that the mining sector will require into the future. So it's a very complex question, I guess, in terms of the approach, but the approach is, let's look at the technology enablers, let's look at the people enablement, but also let's understand the community requirements as well in order to make this as a successful transition.
Thanks, Gaston. Gentlemen, any comments from you? Or if not, I'll move on to another question. I'd like to come back to you, Mark, and since you mentioned your very real interest in digital innovation programs, how do you assess the return on investment of implementing digital innovation programs, and what are some of the markers in health and safety that you would look to measure? Looking, if you're going to look forward with the assessment of data, what would you look for?
Yeah, so I think when we talk ROI in mining, we tend to simplistically think about dollars or risk as being primary drivers for why we invest. I actually think Gaston's point a second ago is really a really important one to keep in mind when it comes to really understanding the complexity of innovation or transformation type activities. And I think it's something that mining is still trying to come to grips with. In the technology space, we tend to talk about people, process, and technology. That triad is kind of the key, the key things that we're working with when we're trying to develop solutions. And in most respects, the technology piece is actually the easy bit when it comes to innovation, because you could walk up and down St. George's Terrace here and find literally hundreds of places with quite interesting technology solutions that would work in the mining space. The biggest problem does come when you start to tackle the whole issue of changing process, because the technology does enable you to do business in a different way. And that is tremendously difficult, and it's difficult because of people as well. People, the change required, some of the issues that Gaston alluded to in terms of what people's roles are now and what they might be, and how some of this stuff shifts and changes. So I think when you start to sort of grapple with ROI and investment in these things, and really understanding the full cost of what's required to bring about that kind of change in a business, and actually fully get the benefits from what's possible. I think mining companies that is an area we struggle with in the whole change piece, and we tend to do a lot of sort of point solutions, discrete kind of fixes or improvements, and that sometimes the broader improvements around process are a bit more difficult. In the health and safety space particularly, I think when you used the point, the word markers there. I guess when we take a look at a lot of the stats and the numbers that we keep around safety, I tend to view most of those as lagging indicators. They're sort of, we had this many incidents, and they're really after the fact. Sometimes some distance after the fact, and that traditionally has been the way that we tend to measure success or failure with our safety initiatives and what's going on in our spaces. And it's and I think what is very exciting about some of the new technologies, and almost all of you have already alluded to the predictive technologies. I think we're moving from that reporting, where we're just reporting numbers and what happened. We're moving now to that advanced kind of analytics where we can actually dredge through some of that information and make some intelligent, findings and insights around maybe where we need to dig a bit deeper or put a bit more effort. So I think that's been a big jump. We've started to see businesses able to use some of these technologies to really understand their data a bit more and maybe focus their attention on particular problems and get to that root cause type stuff, or maybe find some correlative data that says, look, we're not quite sure why, but if we focused here, we think we might see some impacts. So I think that analysis piece, and in the future, which I think we're still getting to, but that predictive piece where we are able to sort of begin to take a look at a number of things happening in the business and predict that we may have issues. And, and some of this is, we already humanly do some of this intuitively. Gaston mentioned earlier, when we extended rosters up at sites through the COVID, the heat of the COVID period, we predicted that we might begin to see a lot more small safety incidents because people are a bit more tired, a bit more fatigued, a bit stressed. They've been up there too long. And so you just see a rash of little incidents start to kick in, and it was entirely predictable. I guess the new technologies allow us to take some of that a bit further and really use some of the data in interesting ways to do that predictive piece. And I think that's going to be the exciting future of some of the health and safety stuff, where we move from lagging indicators to leading indicators, and we also begin to sort of predict where things may be going. We can use a lot of real-time data. Again, this is a big thing where we can use computer vision to assess a lot of sites and areas and be able to quickly assess whether people have the right PPE on or whether they're doing something that looks dangerous, and have real-time alerting on some of that to catch stuff as quickly as we can, a lot earlier than perhaps we have in the past. So I see those are going to be the places where I think we've seen and we are seeing. I've seen a number of great examples of the PPE example, for instance, of computer vision technology being able to pick up that someone's not wearing a mask, or they're not wearing the safety glasses or gloves, or that stuff's actually quite doable. And I think we'll start to see more and more of that. We'll see computer vision type solutions that are telling us someone's in a space they shouldn't be in, and we'll have automatic lockdown of equipment to protect them. So there'll be a lot of these types of solutions, I think, that start to creep in and have a really positive impact. And I think, to me, it's that time frame from looking at stuff in the past to really beginning to look at it very much in the present, and also begin to think about, what we're seeing and where it takes us, and maybe get ahead of the curve.
Yeah, that's a great insight, Mark. And Brett, you in your business, you'd come across all sorts of companies that are looking at this on a regular basis. And so, what role do you see, the impact of digital innovation in all forms impacting on your customers and clients?
Yeah, sure. Look, I think it's probably actually a good segue from what Mark was just talking about then, in terms of more of that forward-looking piece, but also the live monitoring of activities and events. So I think there's some really cool stuff in terms of emerging technologies that we're seeing at the moment that really link into your wearable devices and things like that, which can actually start monitoring the individual in the moment to be able to create opportunities for intervention before something occurs as well. So some of them, so one that we've been working with, for example, we have most of our workforce is very manual. So a lot of the work that our teams do is very manual and very physical. We have cleaners who are working, could be 12 hours a day, doing repetitive tasks over and over again, cleaning rooms, cleaning washrooms, cleaning offices. One of the biggest risks there is around that around the amount of time they're spending on their feet, the amount of physical movement they're doing, and the risk of physical injury while they're doing it. So there's a technology out there called Spine, which is essentially it's a wearable device, similar to what the footy players would wear when they're tracking their movements. But what this does is it links into an app, and during a day, it'll track all of the movements that the individual has done during their shift. And then at the end of the day, be able to highlight and alert them to the ones of those that were potentially risky movements. So twisting in an awkward direction, bending strangely, whatever it might be, and then create training programs around changing that behavior. So it is that kind of live intervention on a day-to-day basis. This happens over a couple of week period, then is revisited in a few months' time. There's other ones as well that are using wearable technology, again, so fitness type wearables to start tracking kind of sleep patterns, physical activity, and other biometrics around sort of variable heart rate and things like that, to start identifying either within individuals or in work groups if there's heightened levels of stress, fatigue, mental fatigue, whatever it could be, anything that could really distract someone from doing their job on a day-to-day basis. And again, this is something you can then start creating targeted intervention programs on individuals or work groups to be able to make sure that they are physically and mentally well at all times. And with that comes then obviously the flow and benefit of kind of productivity and safety that comes with it. So I think there's, as Mark was saying, I think there's a lot more happening now in the tech space. It is really in that kind of in the moment intervention, which will prevent the risk of injury or incident in the future.
Okay, thank you. Now, gentlemen, we've only got a few minutes left. We've got about 5 minutes left. So let me pose one question totally to the panel, and you know, you can sort of give me the answer if you like, hopefully succinctly, because there's only 5 minutes left. So the question really is: so what does the future of safety in mining look like? And it's really a two-pronged question. Is safety in mining in the future, is it all about technology and the adoption of new technology and the implementation of new technology, which we've talked a bit about, or is it all about attracting a new generation of miners and a new generation of people who think differently and are different with new skill sets? So what does the future of safety in mining look like? Let's start with you, Gaston.
Yeah, sure. I think I will pick up on both Brent and Mark. I think from my point of view is how do we design these solutions with a human-centered design perspective. So being the humans at the center of what we want to build around them, and it is a human plus technology creating a safer environment for the industry. That's probably what I envision as the future of mining would be for safety.
Thanks, Gaston. Mark, what do you? What's your view?
Yeah, look, I really love the wearable stuff, and I think technology does have a huge role to play going forward. I think also the whole broader use of technology to remove people from the dirty, dull, and dangerous type roles is obviously an ongoing thing that will continue to happen. I do think one of the big things in talking about wearables is again, it comes down to that people thing. And we've had direct experience with fatigue management systems, for instance, people's initial unhappiness about being monitored. And so although there's huge value in that monitoring, there's a whole change process of building a culture and a buy-in around the fact that people are happy to be monitored because they see the value and the benefits in it. That's a bit of a journey, you can't take that for granted. It really does take a lot of time and effort to get that buy-in and make sure people are really participating. Because at the end of the day, like cybersecurity, I think safety is very much a culture thing. Tools and technology and all of that only go so far. The rest of it is really people's, having that kind of culture to actually look after each other.
Brett, what's the future look like?
So look, I think Alan, the two comments you raised around whether it's technology or people, I actually think they do very much come hand in hand. I think, as Gaston said, we've got a changing demographic out there within the mining industry as we do move into more technology-led mining operations. And I think with that comes an expectation that the younger demographic, the younger tech demographic want to interact with technology in everything that they do. So I think we need to be able to enable a lot of the practices that we do, whether it's safety or whether it's purely village operations, whatever it might be, having that digital enablement so people are happy to and wanting to interact in a form that they're very used to and very comfortable with. So I think they do very much come hand in hand, I think.
Okay, so I think, gentlemen, we sort of reached a point where we are in violent agreement that the future in safety in mining is a combination of technology plus people. And I must say that as you know, at the start of this session, before we went live, I mentioned a presentation I saw yesterday by Steve McIntosh from Rio Tinto, who was responsible for the area, and he pointed out that in 147 years of mining operations of Rio Tinto, it's only in the last 2 years that they've had 0 fatalities. So quite clearly, it took them 145 years to get to a point where we would say that should be the norm. But the norm for the future is no incidents, no accidents, no exposure to harm of our people that are operating in these environments. And I think all of these things therefore play a role. So if I might just sort of wrap up, as it were, because of the things that I took away from this, I think the question at the start of this was really, as COVID accelerated, what we see as the improvement in the operational components of health and safety to protect our employees across the mining chain. I think the answer is yes, it has. That's what I've taken from the comments that you guys have contributed. I think as well, we also, and in particular, Gaston, you mentioned that we need to be, in the post-COVID environment, aware of the risks as we all get closer together again. I don't know whether all the wonderful panaceas for this COVID are going to work, but there's definitely going to be the social distancing thing implemented, particularly at site. And we're going to be aware of the fact that we only need more critical people at site, rather in operations in particular, rather than a raft of people all the time walking around. So I think that means less people at site, which reduces risk anyway. More testing, more hygiene, which is the point you made, Brett, which I think is a very good one. And Mark, the comment you make about the uptake of technology, in particular the use of things like apps and predictive analytics and all of those tools will become more commonplace as we go forward. But in particular, I think from the people point of view, Gaston, you make the point about change management of people in the new world. And I guess at the end of the day, we're all exposed to people. Technology comes from the way in which we bring things together. But at the end of the day, it's all about people. And if the people don't have a different attitude, then we won't make the progress. So I think that's just about it in terms of where we are. My understanding is that we've probably run out of time. So I'd like to thank you all for your participation and contribution to this panel. I think it's been very worthwhile. And thank you very much for your thought-provoking inputs into the panel. Thanks, everybody.